The cold steel of the railroad tracks pressed against the trembling paws of the German shepherd. His breath came in frantic bursts, clouds of fear rising in the icy air. The distant hum of an oncoming train grew louder, its vibrations rattling through the ground like an impending doom. Someone had left him here to die, alone, helpless. But fate had other plans, and in the final moments before disaster struck, a shadow emerged from the fog, one that would change everything. The sun hung low in the winter sky, casting long shadows over the quiet, snow-covered landscape. The crisp air smelled of pine and frost, and the distant hum of a train rumbled through the valley. Ryan gripped the steering wheel with one hand, the other resting on the gear shift of his old pickup truck as he made his way home from town. The roads were nearly empty, just as he preferred. After years of serving in the military, he had found solace in the solitude of Colorado's countryside. Out here there were no crowds, no noise, just the stillness of the wilderness and the whisper of the wind. But tonight, something felt off. As he approached an old, abandoned railroad crossing, a frantic noise cut through the air. A dog's desperate barking. Ryan's eyes flicked to the side of the road, scanning the barren trees and the frozen ground for any sign of movement. The barking continued, sharp and panicked. He slowed the truck, his instincts kicking in, honed from years of sensing danger before it struck. Then he saw it. A large German shepherd, its dark coat matted and dusted with snow, was struggling against something near the tracks. At first, Ryan thought the dog was caught on something, maybe a piece of debris. But as he pulled closer and switched off his headlights, his stomach twisted in horror. The dog wasn't just stuck, it was tied. Thick, rough rope bound its hind legs and torso, securing it to the cold steel rails. Its chest rose and fell in short, frantic breaths, eyes wide with fear. The dog's muzzle was raw, likely from trying to chew through the restraints. It jerked its head toward Ryan, ears pinned back, tail tucked. A broken whimper escaped its throat as the distant rumble of the train grew louder. Someone had left this dog here to die. Ryan threw the truck into park and jumped out, his boots crunching against the frozen gravel. The wind bit at his exposed skin as he raced toward the trembling animal. The train whistle shrieked in the distance, the ground vibrating beneath him. "Easy, buddy," Ryan murmured, kneeling beside the dog. "I got you." The dog flinched as he reached for it, growling low in its throat, fear overriding reason. Ryan didn't blame it. This animal had been betrayed by humans before. He moved slowly, pulling the hunting knife from his belt and slicing through the first coil of rope. The train was closer now, its headlights cutting through the dark, an unstoppable force roaring down the tracks. The rope was thick, the knots tight, but Ryan worked quickly, his fingers numb from the cold. He felt the dog's rapid heartbeat beneath its ribs as he cut through the last restraint. No sooner had the final knot come undone than the dog leapt up, stumbling from its weakened limbs but determined to flee. Ryan barely had time to move before the train thundered past, its horn blaring, shaking the very earth beneath them. Snow sprayed up in a whirlwind of ice and sound, and for a moment all Ryan could do was kneel there, catching his breath. The German shepherd stood a few feet away, panting heavily, its chest heaving. It watched him, its body still poised to run. Ryan slowly reached out a hand, palm up. "You're safe now." The dog hesitated, muscles tense, before taking a cautious step forward, then another. Its amber eyes locked onto his, and for a brief moment, something unspoken passed between them. Trust, uncertain, but there. Ryan exhaled and stood. "Let's get you out of here." As he turned back toward his truck, he didn't notice the figure watching him from the shadows beyond the trees, their breath curling in the cold night air. Ryan drove in silence, the truck's engine humming steadily as the heater struggled to keep the cold at bay. The German shepherd sat in the passenger seat, stiff and alert, its body pressed against the door as if preparing to bolt at any moment. Every few minutes it would glance at him, eyes flickering with uncertainty, before turning back toward the window. The tension in the air was palpable, a silent battle of trust and fear waged between man and beast. When they arrived at Ryan's cabin, nestled deep in the woods, the dog hesitated before stepping out. The snow-covered ground crunched under its paws as it cautiously sniffed the air. Ryan opened the door, stepping aside to give the dog space. "Come on in," he said softly, but the dog lingered at the threshold. It wasn't until Ryan walked away, giving it time to decide, that the German Shepherd finally crept inside. The warmth of the cabin enveloped them both, the scent of pine and burning wood filling the air. Ryan flicked on a lamp, casting a soft glow over the rustic interior. The dog remained near the door, ears pricked, muscles coiled tight. "All right, buddy, let's get a look at you." He crouched a few feet away, examining the dog's condition. The animal's ribs were faintly visible beneath its thick coat, its paws raw from the cold. A jagged scar ran along its hind leg, partially hidden beneath dark fur. Bruises and old wounds marred its body, evidence of a hard life. "You've been through hell," Ryan muttered. "Guess that makes two of us." Ryan stood and grabbed a bowl, filling it with water before placing it on the floor. The dog eyed it warily, then cautiously stepped forward, lapping up the water with slow, deliberate movements. Next, Ryan fetched some leftover meat from the fridge, placing it near the bowl. Hunger overpowered fear, and the German Shepherd devoured it within seconds. As the days passed, Ryan observed the dog's behavior carefully. It flinched at sudden movements, cowered when he raised his voice, habits formed from years of mistreatment. The sight stirred something deep within Ryan, a familiar ache that had never fully healed. He recognized the fear in the dog's eyes because he had seen it before, in the mirror, in the faces of soldiers who had lost too much. Nights were the worst. The dog would whimper in its sleep, paws twitching as if running from something unseen. Ryan understood those nightmares well. He had lived them. More than once, he found himself sitting up in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of the dog's restless sleep. Sometimes, when the dreams were too much, he'd get up, stoke the fire, and sit in silence, knowing that somewhere in the cabin, the German Shepherd was awake too, haunted by ghosts of the past. One evening, as Ryan sat on the couch, the dog finally approached him. Slowly, cautiously, it lay down at his feet. A silent truce. Ryan reached down, running his fingers through the thick fur, feeling the warmth of a living being beside him. "You need a name," he murmured. He thought for a moment before settling on one. "Max." The dog's ears twitched, but it made no move to leave. Ryan let out a breath, leaning back into the couch. Maybe, just maybe, they could heal together. Max's recovery was slow but steady. The wounds on his body began to heal, but the scars in his mind lingered. He remained wary, flinching at sudden movements, shrinking back whenever Ryan reached for him too quickly. It was a silent reminder of whatever torment he had endured before Ryan found him. Trust, Ryan knew, would take time, and patience was something he was willing to offer. One evening, as Ryan sat near the fireplace, watching the flames dance, he absent-mindedly traced his fingers over Max's worn collar. The leather was cracked, its metal tag nearly unreadable. He took a damp cloth and carefully wiped away the grime, revealing the faint engraving beneath. His breath caught when he made out the name, Hank. The name sent a prickle of unease down Ryan's spine. He had heard it before, mentioned in hushed tones at the local feed store, in casual warnings exchanged by townsfolk. Hank Walker, a name that carried a reputation and not a good one. Ryan didn't know much, but he had heard enough. Hank had a history with animals, and not in the way a decent man should. Curiosity turned to determination. Ryan wasn't one to leave questions unanswered, especially not when it involved Max. The next morning, he drove into town and made his way to the small animal shelter, a modest building run by a handful of dedicated volunteers. The air inside smelled of kibble and disinfectant, and the sound of barking echoed from the back rooms. An older woman behind the counter looked up as he entered. "Ryan," she greeted, surprised. "Didn't expect to see you here." He placed the collar on the counter. "I need some information." Her eyes narrowed as she picked it up, turning it over in her hands. When she saw the name, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Where did you get this?" "From the dog I rescued." Ryan kept his voice even. "German Shepherd, tied to the tracks." She exhaled sharply, setting the collar down. "That poor thing. You know him?" She nodded. "We had him here twice before. He came in bruised, underweight, scared out of his mind. We knew he'd been abused, but when his owner came looking for him, there wasn't much we could do. Legally, the dog was his." Ryan's fingers curled into fists. "Hank." Her expression hardened. "Hank Walker. That man has no business owning an animal. We tried everything, but the system is broken. Every time Max escaped, he ended up back there." Ryan exhaled, feeling his anger simmer. "What else do you know about him?" She hesitated. "He's bad news, Ryan. Rumor is he's involved in something bigger. Dogfighting." Ryan stiffened. "Dogfighting?" She nodded grimly. "It's never been proven, but people talk. We suspect he trains dogs for underground fights. Some of them don't survive." She shook her head. "We always hoped Max would get away for good, but now you're telling me someone tied him to a railroad track?" Ryan's jaw clenched. "Which means someone wanted him gone, and I need to know why." The woman gave him a long look before lowering her voice. "Be careful, Ryan. Men like Hank don't let things go easily." Ryan knew that all too well, but he also knew one thing for certain. Max had run from something far worse than the cold, and now he needed to find out exactly what. The wind howled through the trees, rattling the wooden walls of the cabin as snow drifted down in thick, silent sheets. Inside, the fire had burned low, its embers casting a faint glow against the darkened room. Ryan lay in bed, his mind restless despite the late hour. The more he uncovered about Max's past, the more questions arose. Why had someone gone through the effort of tying Max to the tracks instead of simply discarding him? And why did it feel like something larger was at play? The uneasy thoughts swirled in his head, tugging at old instincts, the ones that never fully faded after his time in the military. He was trained to recognize threats before they struck. And right now, every fiber of his being told him something was off. Then Max's sharp bark shattered the quiet. Ryan sat up instantly, his body tensing as Max bolted to the front door, his growl low and menacing. The dog's entire stance had changed. No longer the timid, uncertain animal Ryan had taken in. This was something else, pure, primal warning. Ryan's hand moved automatically to the bedside drawer, fingers curling around the cool metal of his handgun. Max never barked like this. Not unless there was a reason. Slipping out of bed, he moved cautiously toward the window, keeping his body low. Outside, the porch light cast long shadows across the snow-covered ground. At first there was nothing, just the whispering of the wind, the trees swaying in the darkness. But then, movement, a figure slipping along the edge of the cabin, just beyond the light's reach. Ryan's grip tightened on the gun. His pulse remained steady, trained to stay calm under pressure. He flicked off the safety, took a slow breath, then reached for the front door handle. The moment he stepped onto the porch, Max lunged forward, barking viciously. Ryan's eyes swept the yard, tracking footprints in the fresh snow, leading toward the back of the house. His gut twisted with an unmistakable certainty. Someone had been here. Someone had been watching. Then he saw it. Scratched roughly into the wooden wall, deep grooves cutting through the grain were the words, "Stay out of things that don't concern you." Ryan exhaled slowly, his jaw clenching. So this wasn't just about Max anymore. Someone knew he was asking questions. Someone wanted him to stop. A sharp rustling from the tree line made his head snap up. There, just beyond the reach of the porch light, the shadow moved again, quick, purposeful. Ryan stepped off the porch, his boots crunching against the frozen ground. Max was already beside him, ears pinned back, growl rumbling deep in his chest. Ryan raised his gun. "Step out, now!" Silence. The figure hesitated for just a moment, then bolted. Ryan sprinted forward, but by the time he reached the edge of the woods, the intruder was gone, swallowed by the dense forest. He stopped, listening to the distant sound of retreating footsteps before they vanished entirely. Ryan stayed there for a long moment, scanning the tree line. His breath was steady, controlled. He had spent too many nights in war zones to let his nerves get the best of him. But this wasn't the battlefield. This was his home, and someone had just invaded it. Turning back toward the cabin, he studied the warning carved into the wood once more. Whoever had left it thought it would be enough to scare him off. They didn't know him very well. Inside, he bolted the doors and windows before stoking the fire back to life. Sitting in the armchair, gun resting in his lap, he ran a hand over Max's head, feeling the tension still thrumming beneath the dog's skin. "Looks like we made someone nervous, buddy." Max let out a huff, curling up beside him but keeping one eye open. Ryan stared into the flames, his decision already made. Walking away wasn't an option. He had stepped into something bigger than he'd anticipated, and now he was going to see it through. Tomorrow he'd start digging even deeper. Ryan had spent enough time in war zones to know when a situation was bigger than it seemed. The warning carved into his cabin wall confirmed what his instincts had already told him. Max's survival was no accident. Someone had meant to silence him before he could dig deeper. But instead of backing off, Ryan did what he had always done in the face of threats. He moved in closer. For the next few days, he observed Hank Walker from a distance, keeping a low profile as he followed him through town. It wasn't difficult. Hank was predictable. He spent most of his time drinking at a rundown bar near the highway or making stops at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Ryan had driven past the building before, thinking it was nothing more than a relic of a failed business. But now he watched as men came and went at odd hours. What struck him most was the sound that carried through the cold night air whenever the warehouse doors opened. Barking. Not just barking. Frenzied, desperate howls. Ryan knew what he had stumbled upon before he even confirmed it. Hank wasn't just an abusive dog owner. He was running an illegal dog-fighting ring, and Max had been a part of it. The pieces started falling into place. Max had escaped one too many times, costing Hank money, but instead of simply putting him down, Hank had chosen something more brutal, tying Max to the railroad tracks, not just to kill him, but to send a message. Perhaps it was meant for other trainers in the underground world of dogfighting. Or maybe it was to ensure that the authorities, if they ever found Max's body, would assume it was a freak accident rather than an act of cruelty. Either way, Max had been discarded like a broken tool, left to die in a way that would erase all traces of Hank's crimes. But Max had survived, and now Ryan had the proof he needed to take Hank down. He spent the next evening gathering evidence, snapping photos from his truck as he documented the comings and goings from the warehouse. He recorded the barking, the injured dogs being dragged from vans, the exchanges of cash between men whose faces were hardened with years of cruelty. When he finally had enough, he made the call to the sheriff's department. The response he received wasn't what he expected. "Walk away from this, Ryan." Sheriff Mason's voice was low, almost cautious, as though he knew exactly what Ryan had uncovered. Ryan's grip on the phone tightened. "You don't understand. I have proof. These dogs are suffering. Some of them are—" "I know what Hank Walker is," Mason interrupted, "but I'm telling you, he's got powerful people behind him, people you don't want to cross. You think this is just about a few illegal dogfights? You think this is just about Hank?" Ryan felt his jaw tighten. "If you know what he's doing, why haven't you shut him down?" A long silence. Then Mason sighed. "Because the last man who tried didn't live long enough to regret it." Ryan exhaled slowly. He had known corruption ran deep in small towns, but hearing it confirmed made his stomach turn. The law wasn't going to help. Hank wasn't just some low-level criminal. He was a piece of something bigger, something rotten. If Ryan wanted to put an end to it, he'd have to do it himself. That night, he made his decision. He waited until midnight, when the roads were empty and the town was asleep, then drove toward the warehouse. He parked his truck a mile away and continued on foot, moving silently through the shadows. Max, sensing the tension in the air, padded beside him, his ears alert. The warehouse loomed ahead, its rusted exterior barely illuminated by the lone streetlight flickering nearby. Ryan crouched behind a stack of discarded crates, watching. There were 2 men outside, both smoking, their conversation muffled by the wind. Ryan waited until they wandered to the other side of the lot, then moved quickly toward the side entrance. The lock was old, easy to pick. Within seconds, he was inside. The stench hit him first. Blood, urine, fear. Ryan forced himself to stay focused as he moved deeper into the warehouse. Rows of metal cages lined the walls, each containing a dog, some whimpering, others too weak to even lift their heads. His stomach churned as he spotted the fresh wounds on their bodies, the evidence of recent fights. These weren't just neglected animals. They were victims. A faint noise made him freeze. Voices, footsteps. He pressed himself against the shadows, heart pounding as Hank's voice carried through the space. "Make sure they're ready for the next fight. That last one lost me money." Another man chuckled darkly. "What about that mutt, the shepherd?" Ryan's breath caught. "Don't worry about him," Hank scoffed. "He's dead. Or at least he should be." The men continued talking, but Ryan wasn't listening anymore. His mind was racing. Hank didn't know Max was alive. He still thought his plan had worked, and that meant Ryan had an advantage. He inched forward, pulling out his phone to take more photos. If he could just get a few more. A floorboard creaked beneath his boot. The voices stopped. Ryan barely had time to react before a flashlight beam cut through the darkness, landing directly on him. "Well, well," Hank's voice drawled, "look what we have here." Ryan turned, but before he could move, something hard slammed against the back of his head. Pain exploded through his skull. The last thing he heard before the darkness swallowed him was Max's furious barking and the sound of Hank laughing. Pain flared through Ryan's skull as he slowly regained consciousness. His head throbbed, the dull ache pulsing in time with his heartbeat. The cold, hard surface beneath him told him he was still inside the warehouse. His wrists were bound tightly behind his back, the rough rope cutting into his skin. Blood crusted at the corner of his mouth, the sharp taste lingering on his tongue. He forced his breathing to remain steady, assessing his surroundings without opening his eyes fully. Voices murmured nearby, Hank and his men. "You should have kept your nose out of this, soldier boy," Hank sneered. A heavy boot connected with Ryan's ribs, sending a sharp wave of pain through his body. He gritted his teeth, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. One of Hank's men chuckled. "What do we do with him? Cops ain't gonna be a problem, but he is." Hank exhaled, considering. "We make it look like an accident. Maybe he tried to stop a fight, got torn apart by the dogs." Ryan clenched his jaw. He knew what men like Hank were capable of. He also knew that if he didn't act soon, he'd be dead before sunrise. His thoughts raced, searching for an opening, a weakness, anything he could use, but then... A low, rumbling growl echoed through the warehouse. Max. Ryan's heart pounded. The German shepherd stood outside his cage, hackles raised, his amber eyes locked onto Hank with a deadly intensity. And he wasn't alone. The other dogs, some battered, some barely able to stand, were awake now, their instincts kicking in. They knew suffering, they knew fear, and now they knew their chance for freedom. Hank let out a dry laugh. "What, your mutt thinks he's going to take us all on?" Max's growl deepened, his stance unwavering. Then, with terrifying speed, he lunged. Chaos erupted. Max's teeth found the arm of the nearest man, tearing into flesh with precision. The man screamed, staggering back as another dog followed Max's lead, snapping at his legs. More dogs poured from their cages, their pent-up rage exploding in a fury of snarls and barks. Ryan wasted no time. Using the distraction, he twisted his wrists against the rope, ignoring the sting of his skin as he maneuvered his hands free. He barely had time to react before another man lunged at him, but Ryan was ready. Years of combat training took over. He dodged the attack, slamming his elbow into the man's ribs before driving his fist into his throat. The man crumpled. Another came at him with a knife. Ryan sidestepped, grabbing his attacker's wrist and twisting until the blade clattered to the ground. He kicked it away just as Max leapt onto Hank, knocking him to the floor. The fight didn't last long. The warehouse was in chaos. Men screaming, dogs attacking, the air filled with the sounds of a battle long overdue. Ryan reached for his phone, hands shaking as he dialed the sheriff's number. "This is Ryan. I have proof. I have everything. Get here now." For once, the sheriff didn't hesitate. The sirens cut through the night minutes later, flashing red and blue lights illuminating the warehouse. Hank and his men, bloodied and desperate, tried to escape, but there was nowhere left to run. The authorities stormed the building, guns drawn, orders shouted. Ryan stood in the midst of it all, breath heavy, bruised but alive. Max, still standing protectively beside him, let out a low whine. Ryan knelt, running a hand through his fur. "You did good, buddy. You did real good." As the officers secured the criminals and the rescue teams moved in, Ryan watched as the once broken dogs were finally freed. They had endured pain, cruelty and suffering, but tonight they had fought back. And they had won. The days that followed were a blur of police reports, legal proceedings and media attention. Hank Walker and his men had been arrested, charged with animal cruelty, illegal gambling and a slew of other offences. The underground dogfighting ring had been exposed, its operation dismantled, and the dogs that had suffered under its grip were now being treated and rehabilitated. Justice had been served. But for Ryan, the real victory lay not in the headlines or the courtroom. It was in the quiet moments that followed, the ones where he could finally breathe again, where the weight on his shoulders wasn't so heavy. Max was officially his now. The legal paperwork had been finalized, though Ryan had known from the moment he pulled him off those railroad tracks that Max was never going anywhere. The German Shepherd had become more than just a dog. He was family. The first night back at the cabin, Max curled up beside the fireplace, his body relaxed in a way Ryan had never seen before. No more flinching at sudden movements, no more eyes darting toward the door as if expecting someone to drag him away. "You're home now," Ryan murmured, sitting beside him. Max's ears flicked at his voice, and a moment later he rested his head against Ryan's leg with a contented sigh. For the first time in a long time, Ryan felt like he was home too. Ryan wasn't the type to sit still for long, and after everything that had happened, he knew he couldn't just walk away from the fight. He started volunteering at the local rescue shelter, the same one that had tried to help Max before. He wasn't just another pair of hands. He became a voice for the voiceless, someone who had seen firsthand what cruelty looked like and refused to let it go unanswered. At first, the other volunteers didn't quite know what to make of him. Ryan was quiet, intense, and had the kind of presence that made people straighten their posture when he entered a room. But it didn't take long for them to realize that behind the ex-soldier's hardened exterior was a man who cared deeply, who would spend hours with the most broken dogs, earning their trust the same way he had with Max. He learned the names of every dog that came through the doors. He sat with the ones too scared to move, letting them come to him on their own time. He helped with training, took the ones that needed the most work on long hikes through the forest surrounding his cabin, teaching them that not all humans were cruel. Max was always by his side, as if he understood that this was their purpose now. The dog that had once been discarded as worthless was now the one showing others how to trust again. One evening, as Ryan was closing up the shelter, he found himself standing in front of Max's old cage, the one he had been locked in when Ryan first started looking into Hank. It had been cleaned out, repurposed for another rescue, but the sight of it still sent a flicker of anger through him. He crouched down beside it, running a hand along the bars. "You were here once," he murmured to Max, who sat beside him, "and now look at you." Max let out a soft chuff, pressing his head into Ryan's shoulder. Ryan smiled. Winter gave way to spring, the snow melting into rushing rivers and blooming wildflowers. The days stretched longer, warmer, but Ryan didn't mind. He and Max had fallen into a rhythm, a life that finally felt right. Some days they spent hours at the shelter, helping train and rehabilitate the rescues. Other days they simply hiked through the mountains, no destination in mind, just the steady companionship of man and dog. One afternoon, Ryan sat on the porch of his cabin, a beer in hand, watching as Max dozed in the sunlight. He had been thinking a lot lately, about his past, about the years he had spent running from things he didn't want to face. For so long, he had told himself that solitude was the only way to escape the ghosts that followed him. But Max had changed that. Max had shown him that healing wasn't done in isolation. It was done through connection, through trust, through finding something or someone worth fighting for. Ryan exhaled, running a hand through Max's fur. "We did all right, didn't we?" Max let out a contented sigh, his tail thumping against the wooden porch. Yeah, they had found home. Thunder roared as rain hammered the pavement, but he stood his ground. His golden fur was drenched, his body trembling, yet he didn't run. When a rescuer stepped forward, lightning split the sky, illuminating the snarl on his face. He wasn't just scared, he was warning them. What was hidden beneath the storm? And why was he willing to fight to protect it? Stay with us for a story of fierce devotion, an unbreakable bond, and a discovery that no one saw coming. The rain came down in sheets, hammering the pavement with relentless force. Thunder cracked through the night, sending tremors through the darkened streets of the quiet suburb. Lightning flashed, illuminating the empty road ahead. Then she saw it. At first, it was just a shape in the distance, a shadow barely visible through the torrential rain. But as she drove closer, her breath caught in her throat. A dog. Laura slowed the car, heart pounding. The dog was standing in front of something, a battered cardboard box. She pulled over, switching on her hazard lights, and grabbed the emergency flashlight from the glove compartment. Stepping out, the wind almost knocked her sideways, rain lashing against her skin like tiny daggers. She lifted the flashlight and aimed it at the dog. The retriever didn't move. It stared at her, golden eyes burning with something that wasn't just fear, it was determination. The dog let out a low, guttural growl. She froze. Its stance shifted, shoulders tensed. It wasn't just afraid, it was protecting something. Laura swallowed, her gaze dropping to the box. The cardboard was damp, edges curling from the rain. Something about it sent a shiver down her spine. The retriever snapped its jaws, lunging forward a fraction, just enough to make her stop. Lightning flashed overhead, and for a split second, Laura saw the exhaustion in the dog's stance. The way its legs wobbled, how its breath came in short, ragged pants. It was running on nothing but pure willpower, soft, muffled, and a cry. Laura's breath caught in her throat. And now, a baby's cry? The wind howled as Laura knelt on the rain-soaked pavement, her fingers trembling as she reached for the edges of the soggy cardboard box. The golden retriever stood rigid beside it, its soaked fur clinging to its shivering frame. Rain dripped from its muzzle, but its eyes, deep pools of unwavering determination, never wavered from her. Taking a steadying breath, she peeled back the damp flaps of the box, and the world seemed to freeze. Inside, swaddled in a thin, tattered blanket, was a baby, a newborn, tiny, fragile, its little fingers curled into delicate fists, its cheeks unnaturally pale. Raindrops dripped from the box's edges, dampening the already soaked fabric wrapped around the infant's body. The baby's lips were tinged a faint icy blue, and then it made a sound, a weak, barely audible whimper. Laura felt her stomach drop. It was alive, but barely. The dog nosed at the baby, pressing its wet muzzle against the tiny body, whimpering softly. It was checking on it. The retriever gave a small, desperate whine and pushed its body against Laura's side, as if trying to urge her to move. "Get help, now!" She pressed the baby to her chest, wrapping it in her rain-drenched jacket as best as she could. One hand fumbled for her phone. She could barely feel her fingers as she swiped across the wet screen and dialed 911. The call connected. She turned to her car, already moving. "What's your location?" The operator's voice remained steady, but Laura could hear the urgency behind it. "Emergency services are on the way. Stay on the line." Laura yanked open her car door, slid into the driver's seat, and carefully cradled the infant against her chest. She cranked up the heater, letting the warm air blast through the vents. The retriever jumped in after her, collapsing into the passenger seat with a thud. A piece of paper. It was crumpled, damp, barely clinging to the bottom of the box. With shaky fingers, she reached back and snatched it up. Her eyes scanned the smeared ink. "Please save my baby. I had no other choice." She read it again, the words piercing through the chaos of the moment. Who had left this child here? Had they been watching from the shadows, waiting for someone to find the baby? Or had they been long gone, leaving the infant's fate in the hands of chance? Laura swallowed hard, unable to finish that thought. A sudden cough, soft but there, pulled her focus back to the baby. It was weak, but it was breathing. She held it closer. "You're okay. Just hang on." It knew something. But what? The wail of sirens pierced through the storm. Headlights flashed through the rain as an ambulance skidded to a stop in front of her car. Paramedics rushed toward her, their voices muffled by the pounding rain. Laura pushed open the door and stepped out, the baby still clutched tightly in her arms. "Over here!" The medics took the infant with the utmost care, swiftly wrapping it in thermal blankets as they checked its vitals. "Where did you find this baby?" Laura hesitated. Her gaze flickered to the retriever still sitting in her car, watching everything unfold. She exhaled sharply. "A dog led me to it," she finally said. The paramedic frowned, glancing at the retriever. "That dog?" Laura nodded. The other medic, now placing an oxygen mask over the baby's tiny face, turned to his partner. "We need to get this little one to the hospital, fast. Asterisk, asterisk." The ambulance doors swung open and within moments they were gone. Laura stood frozen in the downpour, heart racing. The retriever stepped out of the car and stood beside her. It let out a soft whimper, ears flattened against its skull, and suddenly Laura knew exactly what it wanted. It needed to. She crouched down, brushing wet strands of hair from her face. "You're coming with me," she whispered. The retriever didn't hesitate. As she slid into the driver's seat, she cast one last glance at the rain-soaked pavement, the empty box sitting there like a ghost of the moment that had just unraveled. Who had left that baby there? And why had this dog been the only one protecting it? As she pulled onto the road, heading straight for the hospital, one thing was certain. This was just the beginning. The hospital doors burst open as Laura rushed inside, her clothes still dripping from the storm. The paramedics moved quickly, cradling the fragile newborn in their arms, their faces tight with urgency. Nurses and doctors swarmed in, guiding them toward the emergency room. Laura took a shaky breath, her pulse hammering in her ears. Before anyone could react, the dog moved. It darted past them, slipping between the legs of a startled doctor, following the gurney carrying the baby. "Wait!" Laura called, but the retriever ignored her. It wasn't running away, it was following the baby. By the time Laura caught up, the dog had stopped in front of the emergency room doors. Its body was tense, ears pinned back, its wet paws leaving faint prints on the sterile floor. A nurse tried to usher it away, but it stood firm. The retriever let out a soft but firm growl as the doors swung open, revealing the small infant being placed under a heat lamp. One of the doctors turned to her. "Are you the one who found the child?" Laura nodded. "Yes. But it wasn't just me, it was him too." She motioned to the retriever, who hadn't moved an inch from the doorway. "He guarded that box like his life depended on it." Laura swallowed. "Even in the storm." The doctor nodded. "That might have saved the child's life. Newborns can lose body heat dangerously fast. If this dog stayed close enough, he might have kept it warm just long enough." Laura exhaled, blinking against the sudden sting in her eyes. The retriever whined, tail flicking nervously as he stared at the baby. Laura knelt beside him, gently placing a hand on his soaked fur. "He's okay," she whispered. "You did good." For the first time since she had found him, the retriever relaxed, just a little. A soft cry came from the baby. His tail gave the smallest hesitant wag. The retriever didn't even blink. An hour later, after giving her full statement to the police, Laura sat in the waiting area, exhaustion settling into her bones. A vet technician had given him a quick checkup, confirming what Laura already suspected. He was underweight, dehydrated, and had an old scar on his front leg, but otherwise he would be okay. The results had come back only minutes ago. His real name was Charlie, and his owner, a woman named Samantha Carter, reported missing 1 week ago. The police were already working on tracking down any relatives, but so far no one had come forward. The detective assigned to the case, a man named Detective Ruiz, approached her with a grim expression. Laura sat up straighter. "Did you see who left the box?" Ruiz hesitated. "Yes and no." He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. A grainy black and white security clip popped up. Laura leaned in. The image was blurry, distorted by the storm, but the outline was clear. A person, tall, hooded, moving fast. They carried something, a box, and placed it carefully near the alley's entrance. Then, just as quickly as they had appeared, they turned and disappeared into the night. Laura squinted. "Can you zoom in?" "So you have no idea who they are?" Laura shivered. She looked down at Charlie, who was now watching the phone screen with quiet intensity. Had they left his owner behind somewhere? Charlie let out a soft huff, almost like a sigh. Laura reached down, running her fingers through his still damp fur. And now, a faceless figure no one could identify. She looked back at Ruiz. Ruiz exhaled. "That's exactly what I'm telling you." Laura's pulse quickened. "Please save my baby. I had no other choice." No other choice. And what had happened to Samantha Carter? Laura had a feeling they were only scratching the surface. Laura pulled into her driveway, the rain finally beginning to ease, though the cold air still clung to the night. The retriever sat in the passenger seat beside her, eyes flickering between her and the house. He had barely moved since they left the hospital, his body tense, gaze distant. She wasn't sure if it was exhaustion or something deeper, something buried in the past he couldn't communicate. The dog didn't react at first, only turning his head slightly as if registering the name. It wasn't quite right, but it would do for now. Inside, she laid out a few towels, running to grab an old blanket she had tucked away in the closet. Buddy hesitated at the threshold, his large paws muddy, fur still damp from the storm. His eyes flickered with uncertainty, scanning the space like he wasn't sure he belonged. "It's okay," Laura said softly. She knelt, extending a hand. He took a cautious step forward, then another, before finally stepping inside. His body sagged slightly as if the weight of the night was finally catching up to him. Laura didn't force him to do anything more. He had spent the entire evening braving the storm, protecting that baby. Whatever he had been through before that, she could only imagine. She dried him off as best she could, carefully rubbing the towel over his damp fur. When she ran the fabric over his front leg, he flinched. Her brow furrowed. She knelt closer, gently pushing aside the thick fur to get a better look. "Where'd you get this, huh?" she whispered. Buddy didn't react. He simply lowered his head onto the blanket, letting out a slow exhale. Something wasn't adding up. And now, an unidentified person caught on camera leaving that child behind. Tomorrow she would take him to the vet. She needed to know who he really was. The next morning, Laura drove Buddy to Lakeside Veterinary Clinic, where she had taken dozens of rescues before. Dr. Howard, a seasoned veterinarian, greeted her with a warm but tired smile as she entered. "A hero," Laura said, scratching behind the retriever's ears. "But I need to know where he came from." Dr. Howard nodded, leading them into the exam room. Buddy sat patiently, though his eyes darted between Laura and the exit, as if gauging whether he could make a break for it. Laura nodded. "Yeah, he was guarding a baby, wouldn't leave its side. Laura hesitated before adding, "He also has a scar, front leg." The vet gently lifted Buddy's paw, inspecting the old wound. "Looks like an old surgical site. Probably had stitches at some point. Could be from a deep cut, maybe even a break." Laura's stomach turned slightly. Could that mean he was in an accident? "Possibly," Howard murmured, "or something worse." The vet finished the basic exam before turning to the scanner. "Let's check for a microchip. If he has one, we might get some answers." Laura held her breath as Howard ran the scanner along Buddy's neck. The machine beeped. "He's chipped," Howard confirmed. Laura stared. Not Buddy, Charlie. And then her name appeared. Samantha Carter. Laura felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "That's the missing woman," she said, barely above a whisper. Howard frowned. "Missing?" The vet sat back, rubbing his jaw. "If this is her dog, that means she must have been with him recently. The question is, why isn't she with him now?" Buddy, Charlie, shifted slightly on the exam table, his eyes locked onto her, like he somehow knew this conversation was about him. Howard sighed, closing the file. "You should tell the police. If she's still missing, this might give them a lead." Laura nodded, reaching for her phone. The moment he answered, she said, "I found something. The dog, the one from last night. He's not a stray. His name is Charlie, and he belongs to Samantha Carter." An hour later, Laura sat outside the clinic with Charlie lying at her feet, his head resting on his paws. The storm had passed, but the morning air was crisp, the dampness from the night still clinging to the ground. Ruiz pulled up in his unmarked car, stepping out with a look that told her he wasn't sure if this was a break in the case or just another dead end. "You're sure about this?" he asked, glancing down at the dog. Laura nodded. "So where is she now?" Ruiz didn't answer right away. Instead, he crouched in front of Charlie, studying him for a long moment. The retriever looked back, unblinking. Laura glanced down at Charlie. "And in the meantime?" Ruiz hesitated. "You should keep him." Laura blinked. "What?" "For now, at least," Ruiz clarified. "He trusts you, and if Samantha is still out there somewhere, he might be the only one who knows where to find her." Charlie lifted his head slightly at that. Laura exhaled, looking at the retriever who had, in less than 24 hours, turned her entire world upside down. "All right," she murmured. Charlie let out a small, content breath. Maybe, just maybe, he had been waiting for someone to listen. Detective Ruiz pulled up to the old apartment complex, his gut already telling him what he was about to find. Nothing. The building was one of those run-down, barely maintained places on the outskirts of town, the kind where tenants paid in cash and landlords asked no questions. The front door buzzed as an elderly woman let them in. She had been the one to call the tip line when the news about the abandoned baby hit the local stations. "I knew it had to be her," the woman, Mrs. Larkin, muttered as she led them up the dimly lit stairwell. "Poor girl. She was scared out of her mind the last time I saw her." Ruiz glanced at Laura, who stood beside him holding Charlie's leash. The retriever had been pacing since they arrived, ears twitching at every creak of the floorboards. The apartment door was slightly ajar when they reached it, not a good sign. Ruiz pushed it open, stepping inside. The place was abandoned. No furniture, no clothes, no personal items, nothing but dust-covered floors and the faint smell of mildew. Except for a few things. In the center of the room sat a baby crib, still wrapped in its original plastic. The tags dangled from the side, showing it had been bought recently. And on the counter, half covered by a pile of unopened mail, a folder of medical papers. Laura picked it up, flipping through the documents, her brow furrowed. Ruiz took the papers from her, skimming through. Ultrasound results, a prenatal care schedule, blood test records. This was proof. Samantha had been pregnant, recently, which meant, "She's the baby's mother," Laura whispered. Ruiz nodded, his jaw tightening. It wasn't a random case of child abandonment. This was something else, something worse. Laura looked around the empty apartment. "Why would she leave all this behind?" Mrs. Larkin answered from the doorway. "Because she was running." Both Ruiz and Laura turned to face her. The old woman crossed her arms, her lined face dark with something close to anger. That poor girl was scared out of her mind. She had bruises, fresh ones, said she was getting out no matter what. Told me if I ever saw some man sniffing around, I should say I didn't know her. Ruiz frowned. What man? Silence settled in the room. Ruiz felt the weight of it pressing down. Samantha hadn't abandoned her child. She had been forced to make a choice, and now she was missing. Laura glanced at Charlie, who was sniffing around the crib, his tail low. You knew, she murmured. Didn't you? The retriever let out a soft whine, nudging the plastic-wrapped crib, as if he remembered. Meanwhile, Laura took Charlie outside, needing air. The retriever had been restless since they arrived, his body language uneasy. He kept pulling at his leash, as if trying to lead her somewhere. All right, buddy. Where are you trying to go? Charlie took off, not in a panicked sprint, but with purpose. In front of a security camera, Laura's breath caught. Charlie, she whispered, what did you do? An hour later, they were in the surveillance room of a local business. Ruiz, Laura, and a tech specialist huddled around the monitor as grainy footage played. The timestamp showed the night of the storm, only a few hours before Laura found the baby. They were running, frantic, looking over their shoulder. It was Samantha. She clutched something in her arms, a box. She hesitated at the edge of the alley, looking around wildly, as if she expected someone to be chasing her. Then she bent down, placed the box carefully against the wall, and whispered something. Charlie, Buddy, emerged from the shadows, pressing his nose against her hand. Samantha cupped his face, her lips moving fast. Then, suddenly, she was gone. She ran off, disappearing into the night. And Buddy? He sat in front of that box, waiting, and then he moved. They watched as the retriever, using his teeth and front paws, dragged the box toward the streetlight, toward the road, toward help. Charlie had known. He had brought the baby to safety. Ruiz let out a breath. Jesus. The tech guy rewound, zooming in on Samantha's face. Can we track where she went after this? Laura asked. The guy shook his head. She vanished. Ruiz stared at the frozen frame of Samantha's last known moment. She had been terrified, desperate, and now she was gone. Laura sat on the curb outside the station, Charlie lying beside her, his head on his paws. You saved him, she murmured. Charlie blinked up at her, silent. She ran a hand over his fur. But we still don't know where she is. Not randomly, with purpose. What is it, boy? Charlie's eyes locked onto something in the distance. Laura followed his gaze. A dark figure stood across the street, still, watching. Ruiz, she called, scrambling to her feet. Charlie let out a single low growl. Laura exhaled shakily, and someone didn't want her to be found. Detective Ruiz barely had time to sip his coffee when his phone rang. The voice on the other end was tense. Detective, we have a Jane Doe at St. Luke's Hospital. She matches your missing person, Samantha Carter. Ruiz nearly knocked over his coffee. Within minutes, he was out the door. By the time he arrived, Laura was already in the waiting area. Buddy, Charlie, lay at her feet, restless, his ears flicking at every sound. A nurse approached. She's stable but weak. She was found unconscious near the highway a few miles from where you found the dog. Signs of exposure, bruises, dehydration. She's been out there a while. Left there? Ruiz clarified. The nurse hesitated. Yes, like someone dumped her. Laura exhaled sharply. Can we see her? Samantha Carter lay in the hospital bed, pale, bruised, and barely breathing. The monitor beeped steadily, a harsh contrast to the eerie stillness of the room. The moment Charlie entered, something changed. His body tensed, ears perking forward. Without hesitation, he lunged toward the bed. Charlie, wait! Laura reached for him, but he was already there, pressing his wet nose against Samantha's arm, whining softly. A breath hitched, fingers twitched, a murmur weak but clear. Buddy. Her eyes fluttered open. Charlie whined again, nudging closer, his entire body trembling. Ruiz stepped forward. Samantha, can you hear me? Her eyes moved sluggishly before settling on Charlie. Tears welled up. You found him. Ruiz kept his voice calm. Samantha, we need to know what happened. Who did this to you? She didn't answer at first. Her breathing was shallow, fingers tightening in Charlie's fur. Then, hoarse, barely above a whisper. Buddy, my son, he found me. Ruiz and Laura exchanged a look. Buddy found her. Samantha, Ruiz tried again. Who are you talking about? Her gaze darted around the room, flickering with fear. Then, barely audible. He found me. Ruiz stiffened. Who? Samantha swallowed hard. Her eyes shifted toward the door like she expected someone to be standing there. She opened her mouth. The monitor beeped wildly. Her body convulsed. Shit! Get a doctor! Laura shouted. Nurses rushed in, pushing them aside. Charlie barked frantically, clawing at the bed, tail tucked in distress. A nurse adjusted her IV. The monitor stabilized, but Samantha's eyes fluttered shut. Unconscious. Again. Ruiz clenched his jaw. They had been this close. Laura's voice was tight. Did you hear what she said? Ruiz nodded. She wasn't running from nothing. Someone was after her. Laura exhaled. But who? Ruiz's stomach twisted. They had checked everything. No ex-boyfriend, no records of threats. No one. Yet she had disappeared for a week. Someone had left her in that ditch. Someone had abandoned the baby. Someone had found her again. Ruiz scrolled through the case file, looking for any lead, any connection. Nothing, no records, no fingerprints, no evidence of anyone ever chasing her. The police database had no record of him. It was like he didn't exist. Outside the hospital, Ruiz and Laura sat on a bench. Charlie lay at her feet, too still. Ruiz muttered, "Something's not right." Laura nodded. "If she was running from someone, we should have a name, a report, something." "But there's nothing," Ruiz said. "Like he's a ghost." Laura hesitated. "Or like he never existed." Ruiz clenched his jaw. "We need to find out what Samantha was running from," he said finally, "before he finds her again." Charlie lifted his head, ears twitching. A low, quiet growl rumbled from his chest. As if he already knew, this wasn't over. Detective Ruiz sat at his desk, staring at the collection of notes, images, and reports spread across the table. Every piece of evidence pointed to a singular, terrifying reality. Samantha Carter had not just run away. She had been running from someone who was still out there. Someone who had left her for dead and yet had not finished whatever they started. The discovery of her battered body on the highway was not an accident, it was a message. But from whom? And why? Laura sat across from him, arms crossed, her gaze flickering to Buddy, Charlie, who lay curled at her feet. The dog hadn't left her side since Samantha was taken into the hospital, but he was restless, his body tense, as if he was waiting for something. He had done the impossible once before, dragging a newborn out of the storm, making sure the baby survived. Now, Laura couldn't help but feel he was waiting for Samantha to wake up and tell them what to do next. Ruiz exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "All right, let's go over this again." Laura nodded, leaning forward. Samantha disappears a week ago. No signs of forced entry in her apartment, but she leaves behind a baby crib, medical documents, and signs of a hasty departure. That tells us she was planning to leave but didn't make it. Ruiz tapped the timeline. Then, last night she reappears, abandoning the baby in a box, not because she wanted to, but because she had no choice. He gestured toward Buddy. And this guy, he stayed with that baby for hours, through a storm, through freezing temperatures. He didn't move until he knew someone would find them. Laura ran a hand down Buddy's back. The retriever let out a low sigh, eyes half closed, but his ears remained alert. If he hadn't, that baby wouldn't have made it. And Samantha? Ruiz flipped through the file, pausing at the surveillance footage of her final moments before disappearing again. She left the baby, told Buddy something, then ran. Whatever she was afraid of, it was enough to make her abandon her child and her only protector. Laura shivered. Which means he was close. Ruiz didn't respond right away. His jaw was tight, eyes scanning over every clue like he could force the answer to reveal itself. He had worked dozens of missing persons cases, but this one was different. Because the man Samantha was running from? There was no record of him. No police complaints, no restraining orders, no known connections. It was as if she'd been afraid of a ghost, or someone who was powerful enough to erase themselves from existence. Ruiz picked up the case file on Samantha, flipping through the pages. Her medical history, her past addresses, her family members, none of whom she had been in contact with for years. But there was one thing that caught his attention: the gap. "Laura, look at this," he said, handing her the papers. She skimmed through it, frowning. "She disappeared once before?" Ruiz nodded. 5 years ago, she went off the grid for 6 months. No job history, no credit card activity. Then suddenly she pops back up in a different state, under the radar, living a quiet life until she got pregnant. Laura's pulse quickened. "What happened in those 6 months?" "That's what I want to know." Ruiz pulled up the limited police records they had on her. "We need to find out if she had a history of running from something or someone." Buddy let out a quiet whine, his head shifting toward the door. He'd been doing that all night, staring at exits, ears twitching at noises only he seemed to hear. Laura followed his gaze. "You feel it too, don't you?" Ruiz hesitated before shutting the file and standing. "We're going back to the hospital." The moment they stepped into Samantha's room, Buddy stiffened. His ears perked, body tense, like he expected something or someone to appear. Samantha was still unconscious, though her breathing had stabilized. Laura sat beside her, studying her face, looking for any sign she might wake up. Buddy moved closer, resting his head against the bed. He didn't whine this time. He just waited. Ruiz stood at the door, scanning the hall. The nurses had confirmed that no visitors had come for Samantha. No one had called about her. No family had been notified. No one was looking for her, except for him. Ruiz clenched his fists. If Samantha had been found alive, then whoever had hurt her must have thought she was dead, which meant he didn't know she had survived, and that gave them an advantage. "Laura," Ruiz murmured, "stay with her. I need to check something." She nodded, her hand still resting on Buddy's fur. The dog didn't move, his golden eyes locked onto Samantha's face. Ruiz left the room, making his way to the security office. He had them pull every camera feed from the past 24 hours. He watched as Samantha was wheeled in, as the doctors worked on her, as Laura and Buddy entered the hospital with him. But then something changed. His stomach twisted as he saw movement in the background of one of the outdoor cameras. A figure, standing near the parking lot, not close enough to raise suspicion, but watching. Ruiz leaned forward. "Zoom in." The image blurred, distorted by the rain, but one detail was clear. The figure wasn't just anyone. He was familiar. Ruiz's blood ran cold. It was the same unknown person from the first surveillance footage, the same hooded figure who had abandoned the baby. Only this time, he wasn't leaving. He was waiting, and he was watching Samantha. Ruiz slammed his hand against the desk. "Get me a still frame of his face, now." The security guard tried, adjusting the filters, enhancing the resolution. Slowly, a face emerged. Not a stranger, not an unidentified man, but someone they should have recognized. Only there was one problem. The database still had no record of him. His fingerprints, his face, his identity, it didn't exist. And yet, he was real. Ruiz's pulse thundered in his ears. Samantha had been right. She hadn't been paranoid. She hadn't imagined it. Someone had been following her, and now he knew exactly where she was. The hospital smelled sterile, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the tiny crib in the corner of Samantha's room. Her son was in temporary foster care, placed with a family the social worker assured her was kind, safe, and ready to care for him while she recovered. But the empty ache in her chest wouldn't leave. She had nearly lost him. Had it not been for Buddy, Charlie, her baby wouldn't have survived that night in the storm. The thought alone was enough to make her heart clench. The retriever lay beside her bed, his head resting on his paws, golden eyes fixed on her, as if he understood. She ran a hand through his fur, fingers tracing the faint scar on his leg. "You saved him," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. Buddy didn't move, only let out a slow breath as if acknowledging what she already knew. Laura stood near the window, arms crossed. "He's been waiting for you," she said softly. "Ever since that night." Samantha swallowed hard. "I thought I lost him." Laura gave a small nod. "But he never gave up on you." Detective Ruiz entered, holding a folder, his expression unreadable. "No leads yet," he said. "We ran the security footage through every database we have. No matches." He exhaled. "Whoever he is, he's a ghost." Samantha's grip on Buddy tightened. "No," she whispered. "He's real." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken fears. Ruiz studied her carefully. "Are you sure?" She lifted her gaze to meet his. "He found me once," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "He'll find me again." Days passed. Samantha grew stronger, but the shadows of her past still loomed. Laura took Buddy home in the meantime, but she knew he was still waiting. Every time the door opened, his ears perked, his body tensed, expecting her to walk through. One night, as she sat on the couch with him curled at her feet, she whispered, "She's coming back." But she wasn't sure if she was telling him the truth or telling herself. A week later, Samantha was finally discharged. That evening, as she packed up her few belongings, a nurse entered her room, holding a small folded piece of paper. "Someone left this for you at the front desk," she said. Samantha frowned, taking it. The paper was slightly damp, as if it had been carried through the rain. She unfolded it, her breath catching as she read the words scrawled across the page. "You think you've escaped? Don't forget, I always know where you are." Her hands trembled. The note shook in her grip. The room suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing in. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Who gave this to you?" she asked, her voice uneven. The nurse blinked. "It was just left at the front desk. No one saw who dropped it off." Samantha's stomach twisted. Ruiz arrived within minutes. He took the note, scanning it with narrowed eyes. No fingerprints, just like before. Laura's voice was quiet but firm. "This isn't over." Ruiz clenched his jaw. "No, but now we have proof." Samantha barely heard them. Her breathing was shallow, panic curling around her ribs like a vice. Buddy was pressed against her leg, his fur warm, grounding her. Then he growled, a deep, low rumble vibrating through his chest. Laura followed his gaze toward the window. Beyond the glass, the hospital parking lot stretched into darkness, the dim glow of streetlights barely illuminating the pavement. Nothing seemed out of place. Then headlights flashed once. For the briefest second, the light illuminated a figure standing near the farthest edge of the lot, still watching. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the car pulled away. The figure vanished into the night. Buddy barked sharply, body rigid. Samantha's breath hitched. "It's him!" Ruiz grabbed his radio. "Security, check the lot, now!" Officers moved through the area, but by the time they reached the spot where the figure had stood, there was nothing. No footprints, no sign of anyone, but Buddy kept growling. That night, Samantha didn't sleep. Neither did Buddy. He lay beside her bed, eyes locked on the door, his body tense. Laura stayed, refusing to leave her alone. Morning came, but the fear didn't fade. Samantha gripped Buddy's fur, her voice barely above a whisper. "He knows where I am." Laura tightened her grip on her coffee mug. "Then we make sure he never finds you again." Ruiz stood near the door, phone in hand. "We'll keep digging. Whoever he is, we'll find him." But in his voice there was doubt, because how do you find someone who doesn't exist? Buddy nudged Samantha's hand, as if reassuring her. But the question remained. Was the man who hunted her still out there? Or was he something worse, a ghost that would never let her go?